by my co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow. And this evening, we have our special guest joining us this evening, Mr. Avery Vise. This should be a very informative show. So hopefully you guys get some pen and paper, take some good notes. But if not, hey, that's the benefits of technology. We are recording this thing by all means. So you can just go back and rewind and catch the highlighted sections that you missed. But I definitely think I'm looking forward to this show, looking forward to a very eye-opening conversation, as always. And if you would, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please like, share, and subscribe to the video. That helps us get out to a broader algorithm in the YouTube verse or metaverse or whatever the terminology is, but it helps gets us out into the algorithm. So if you would do us a favor, like, share, and subscribe, hit the little bell icon that lets you get notified whenever we drop a new video or any new content whatsoever. So if you hit the bell icon, you'll be one of the first to be notified that we have dropped some new material. And I guess with that being said, I think I covered all the bases. Let me welcome in my co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow. Good evening, Chuck. How are you?
We're doing great. How you doing, Rico?
We're hanging in there. It's. I've had better days, but at least I'm fortunate enough to be able to continue keep on keeping on.
Yeah, you know what? You can still afford to pay the mortgage and put food on the table.
Yeah, we might be eating beans and rice, but we still.
Well, tomorrow you can have rice and beans.
Well, with that said, Chuck, I guess I'll give you the pleasure and the honor of introducing our guest
Yeah.
this evening.
With no further ado, let's bring on our guest, Avery Vise. He is the Vice President of Analytics for FTR, Transportation Intelligence. Good evening, Avery. It's been a long time since you joined us. It was pre-COVID, I think, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
think it was, or perhaps just in the very early days of it.
Right.
I seem to think it might have been around April of 2020, somewhere around there when we were last on the show. So yeah, it's good. It's great to be back with you.
Time flies. It's great
Definitely
to have you.
Better time than it was then. So.
Avery, you've been around this industry an awful long time. Can you just take a second for our listeners? Tell our listeners what FTR does exactly.
Sure. So we are a forecasting and data analysis firm. We specialize strictly in freight transportation and the equipment that is used for that. And it's basically trucking, rail, intermodal, as well as forecasting production and other key metrics related to commercial vehicle, trucks and trailers, as well as rail cars. So we're very honed in. We basically do nothing but freight transportation, but we also do a lot on the economy as well, because our forecasting model is based on econometric. It's an econometric model. In other words, it basically starts with the economy and flows through, because you really can't know everything that's going on in trucking just by doing a survey, even of a large group, because trucking is so fragmented. So we sort of build our forecast of volume and capacity and rates really from the ground up.
So that fragmentation that you speak of in the trucking industry, that's one of the key components is why it's as difficult it is to get some kind of stabilization in pricing.
It really is, because you've historically had pretty easy barriers to entry, and also you have a lot of players out there, so you don't have the kind of it's not a monopoly, but oligopoly, I guess, is the term that you have in rail, where you only have 5 major railroads, and pricing there it doesn't go wild, but it also, you never have a rate decrease in rail.
Right.
Rates never go down in rail, and that's because it's basically inflation plus. Whereas in trucking, it just doesn't work that way. And the current environment is a great example of that, where there's just really more capacity out there than there's freight, and because of that, we have a very difficult rate environment for carriers.
And so, Avery, I guess when did I'm gonna ask a couple of questions about the history. How far back did you very first started, you guys began to notice the decline in rates? Because at one
Well,
point in time we were knocking the cover off the ball, and
sure.
Yeah, well, those days are gone.
Right, right. Well, we really saw this all sort of coming down early last year when we were very rapidly coming down from the record levels and spot rates that we had. You'll recall we ended up 2021, beginning of 2022, with dry van refrigerated rates that were the highest on record. Now, for the first few weeks of that year, you start thinking, okay, well, that's a seasonal adjustment, and we'll stabilize, but we didn't.
Right.
We finally stabilized, around the middle of last year, and since then, really, it's not that things have gotten worse; it's just they're not getting better.
Right.
Rates are really, they're not going down for the most part. They're just not going up, and that's what we're really not used to. I think, especially in the last decade, that has not been the dynamic that a lot of people are used to. So people have been in the industry only since 2014 or 15, or only since 2017 or 18. They have this expectation that, yeah, things will get tough, but then we'll have a bounce back, and all you've got to do is hang on. And I think that's part of what we're going through now. Is I think there's a lot of operations, they're probably are not really, equipped to do this for a living, really understand the business, and they're just sort of, sticking around hoping for that next rebound that will save them. And I don't think it's coming that quickly. That's our outlook. Our outlook is that we're really not looking at, some really any significant strength for probably another 9 months. So it's a long haul out there that we're anticipating being an environment more or less like it is now, just kind of stagnant, kind of weak, without a whole lot of upward pressure. And we'll certainly see seasonal changes in rates. We will see, I presume, we will see the month of November for refrigerated in particular be a strong month, with dry van as well. We'll presume that we will see the end of December be very strong, as it always has been. If we don't, if those periods turn out to be just flat, then we know that things are really tough, because if we're not even going to have seasonality on the upside, then it's a really tough environment.
And now, do you think it could be over in 9 months that quickly?
Well, no, I mean, that's just when we think it's going to start recovering. That's not really when we think we're going to be back. I mean, that's really when we expect things to just start to feel better. I think it'll probably be, well into 2025 before it's something that we would consider to be healthy. I mean, normal is what does normal mean anymore?
Yeah.
2021 was not normal.
No.
A lot of people would love for 2021 to be normal, but it wasn't. 2018 was not really normal, although compared, to 2021, it, was nothing. So I think healthy, meaning that it is a rate that will be compensatory, will support, support a one truck operation comfortably, making more money than, a company driver, which frankly, I did an analysis about a month ago, and, a very large number of these operations are not making as much money as they would make if they were a company driver.
Oh, yeah.
Because spot rates have come down so much. Diesel prices, have become volatile the last, few weeks, but certainly had gone way up until, early October. And, in a lot of cases, a lot of these operations have, they're in one of two boats. They either have older trucks that they got when they entered the market. A lot of these operations entered the market after the pandemic.
Yeah.
So those trucks are getting really old and unreliable and expensive to maintain. Or, they bought trucks in 2021, early 2022, when they were, dreadfully expensive.
Yeah.
But either way, whether they're upside down in equipment today or whether they are needing to replace, replacing that truck, yes, truck prices have come down, but financing costs are up.
That's right.
So it's just a tough environment right now. And if your plan is to hang on until the next recovery, you're going to have to watch costs just extraordinarily closely, because it's not, we're not talking January, February. I don't think we're talking late next year before you'll feel like, okay, things are okay.
Yeah, and you know what?
Maybe middle of next year, but I don't think we'll be back to anything that everybody will actually like by middle of next year.
If they can hang on, because I have a friend of mine he's a loans officer or credit officer at a bank, and he was saying the only thing saving some of the trucking companies is the fact that they have equity in real estate.
Yeah.
And they're plowing, like they're getting mortgages on paid off buildings, and they're plowing money in to keep going because they're hoping for the turnaround. Because every mile they do, they are losing money.
Right. I mean, well, just look at the Yellow corporation situation. I mean,
Well,
they shut down their only real valuable asset is their terminals, is their real estate, and it's quite valuable.
and now I'm going to talk to you about that. I heard something bizarre yesterday.
I think I probably know where you're going, but go ahead.
Okay. Now I heard Rico. I don't know if you're aware of this. This was and I was going to comment. I saw it on Instagram actually, and I was going to comment on it, but I thought I wouldn't comment until we did this show because I wanted to get both your takes on this. There's a company called Jack Cooper. They're an open auto carrier. I know who they are. I don't think, and I may be talking to an attorney. You can put me in my place if I am. I don't think they've ever done stellar financially, and they've gone to the U.S. federal government to get a loan or to get funding to buy Yellow and resurrect it. Mm-hmm. Is this true? And what do you think of it?
I don't have any direct knowledge, but I've read the same reports. I mean, I think the key point here is that Jack Cooper is a Teamster company, and so they're
Right.
They're a unionized workforce already. And I think that's really the hook here, because the Biden administration is very supportive of unionization, very supportive of the Teamsters union, and I think the idea is a unionized carrier going to the government that is very much in favor of unionization, somehow coming out and parlaying this into a resurrection of Yellow. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the problem is that Yellow's kind of already gone, and it's the capacity that was there is already moving on elsewhere. We had obviously a big drop in LTL hiring. We don't have the data. We'll have the data on Friday actually that will tell us really how much of a recovery in LTL there was during September after the big drop in August. But my suspicion is that a lot of those drivers have moved on, and just because let's just play this out. Let's say hypothetically they can get approval to do this and go back in business. I'm just skeptical that a lot of these drivers want to go through all this again, because how likely is that going to be to succeed? I think it's a long shot, and so more power to them. It's a small operation. I believe Jack Cooper has only 1,200 or so trucks. And
they're in a different sector. There's no.
Well, obviously, yes, at a different sector and all. I mean, really, the only key there, the fact is that they're unionized. I mean, I think that's really the what gives them the hook to do this. But I mean, we have ABF. We don't see ABF going out and trying to do the same thing.
Right.
How
many millions have you people as American taxpayers already put into this dog?
Well, there is the $700 million loan, which supposedly at least is going to be repaid once they have the sale of the terminals. So, and I'll my little disclaimer here is I haven't followed the Yellow case that closely, because the goings on of individual companies is not all that important to what we do.
Right.
But certainly, just out of curiosity, I followed a lot of it. So it is not inconceivable. I think that had Jack Cooper done this 2 months ago, perhaps there might have been. I think if this had been done clearly before the actual shutdown, it might have worked.
Yeah, of course.
But,
I mean,
but I think once the
not of
shutdown
course.
occurs, once everything goes into motion, it's just going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
Not to say, though, I mean, just because it will be difficult is not to say that the Biden administration will not necessarily at least attempt to do it, because it is very much in line with what the Biden administration wants to encourage. So, let's see. I don't think it is a zero possibility. So it's definitely not an absolute non-starter. I just think it's highly unlikely to succeed.
You know what? As an American taxpayer, I would be really upset if it was me that my country is spending money on a private business, regardless of whether it's union company or not. It's not where I want my my tax dollars going.
Well, certainly not unprecedented. It's been done many times before. Chrysler, is the
that was a little different, I think.
Chrysler's a little different. It was a core, much larger company, and it was also, part, the automotive industry is a little bit different, I think, than the trucking industry, where you could argue that, that one company is as good as another.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying that one company is as good as another, but you could at least make that case,
Right.
A quote from the great American movie, Dumb and Dumber. So you're telling me there's a chance.
Right.
So
yes.
Let me ask you a question. There's this great transition in North America. I can't talk about the rest of the world, but in North America, towards electric cars.
Mm-hmm.
And if we travel where I live in Southern Ontario, if we travel from where I live to all the way into the surrounding Great Lakes states, especially on the western side of the Great Lakes, but Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, even a little bit of Pennsylvania. It's huge in automotive plants, and all the way down Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama. There's some down there. And I could show you all the trucks. If we went in a vehicle, I could show you all the trucks that are dedicated to hauling automotive parts. And with the electric car, apparently they don't need nearly the components. What's your outlook on the amount of trucks that are going to be required to service the automotive industry in a year or 5 years as compared to right now?
We haven't looked at that issue specifically. A couple of things I would say is that, yes, there's definitely a lot of interest in automotive, in electric, but I think even so that we're talking, a minimum of 5 years before we're really a substantial share of the overall. So I think it's going to be a while. And during that time, there may be other things that can be hauled. I mean, obviously there will be things that we need that we do not currently have, that are required for battery. I think a lot of it comes down to, will these batteries be produced domestically? Because that will replace some of this. I know there's a lot of interest in building that capacity in Ohio, Indiana, in that same basic footprint. So I think that's one issue. First issue is, this is going to take a while. Second issue is, I think that there will be some substitution of freight, for what is lost. Obviously a lot of components will not be any different. There are a lot, you still need axles, you still need wheel ends, you still need brakes, you still need a lot of those things. So I don't know that it's going to have a dramatic impact. And I think it will be gradual enough that we will not, necessarily notice. I think, a lot of people are already, realizing that the electric car, still has a lot, even an automobile, putting aside the heavy truck, which is a completely different animal and has greatly different challenges
Yeah.
than the car. But even the car is just not very practical for, longer driving.
No.
Yeah, there's not enough charging capacity. You can charge quickly enough, but there's just not enough of them for people to do, cross country trips and so on. So I think it's going to be a more gradual. I mean, obviously there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of interest, but I think it'll be gradual. I do think that you're right. There will be some loss of activity probably, but I have a feeling that it will happen over a long enough period of time that it's going to be very difficult to isolate that. And then who knows what other things might come up that actually increases the need. There's a lot of talk of nearshoring, for example.
Right.
Could bringing more production back to North America of things, even consumer goods, which was unthinkable, a decade ago, due to robotics or due to transportation costs going up over time. Could that offset whatever hit might come from the electrification? So I see the concern, but I'm not. It certainly doesn't worry me. But I guess I don't have a stake in it. So.
And if you did, you wouldn't be worried?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think if I were in, if I owned a trucking company tied to the automotive industry, I think I would have bigger concerns than electrification right now. I would be more worried about whether consumers will continue to buy vehicles just because of running out of stimulus money and higher financing costs and all of those issues. That would be my concern. The other thing that's happened is that in the automotive sector, we've closed the gap on the inventory deficit quite a bit over the last 6 months or 9 months. That means that we're now more dependent on sales boost or keeping production higher than we were before. Because if we continue at the rate we're going, by early next year we will be back to pre-pandemic levels at a sales rate in automotive that is about 1 million a year US, million units US below where that used to be. So
even with the strike, even with the strike from the auto workers,
yeah,
and
the
everything?
strike, did not have as dramatic of an impact, I think, as a lot of people. And part of that was just the strategy UAW employed, which was to be a little bit more strategic and tactical rather than, basically striking the entire companies, basically giving them a taste of what they could be seeing. And my guess is that it meant for a longer period of time. The strikes lasted 6 weeks ish, 6, 7
Yeah,
weeks.
it's like a rotating strike.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
My guess is that had been a full scale strike against all three of them, it would have been a shorter strike probably, but a much more disruptive one. And I kind of suspect it would have been uglier and that the UAW might not have gotten as good of a deal. I almost think that there was a little bit of respect earned in how they approached it. But I think the strike may have helped a little bit in that obviously there was some inventory impact from the strike. So, but I have a feeling that it was not, as dramatic as it might be. For one thing, it only affected those three makers for quite a while because it was really took a while for the strike to spread to facilities that were producing components that were used in other vehicles. So I think that, that the effect of the strikes likely will only take, I don't know, a couple of months or so to recover from. So, we really could be back if sales rates stay where they are and production stays where it was before the strikes. We could be back to kind of a normal inventory environment by the middle of next year. Now, that's a big if. One of the schools of thoughts is the strength in the automotive production that we had in the second quarter and third quarter heading into the strikes was because of the strikes. In other words, a lot of the automakers wanted to build inventory ahead of the shutdowns.
Right.
So the big question now is, with the strikes behind them, will we see a lower level of production because we don't have that threat anymore. So
Right.
time will tell on that. I suspect probably a little. It's just hard to say at this point.
Now, did inventories start going towards being balanced out because the supply chain issues were all corrected from the overseas? Like because you look at everything globally, and I realize that every vehicle we have in North America is a assembly of a bunch of components made all over the world.
Sure. It was really started in the middle of last year. We really had the semiconductor shortage had really taken its toll. It kind of modestly recovered in early 2022, but it was really the second half of last year things really recovered. Now, sales did recover as well, and that kept production growing because they weren't going to, claw back the deficit of inventory as long as sales were rising. On the other hand, they didn't really need the inventory unless sales were rising either. So the two kind of fed each other. So rising inventories encouraged more people to buy because a lot of people wanted things that were not available. Maybe there was a specific make and model they were looking for wasn't available. Suddenly it started to become available. So they went out and bought it. That led to more and more production. So, it's quite possible that the theory that they were getting ahead of the strikes is overblown. But we were at record levels of automotive production in the second quarter of this year, and we were pretty strong heading into the strikes. Now we haven't seen a full month's worth of data yet because the strikes did not start until the middle of September,
Right.
and they start off pretty small. So we won't see until I think middle of November what the production data was for October. So that's when we'll really be able to assess just how much of a hit did automotive production take because of the UAW strikes.
And similar to, I guess, everything, all of the stuff is intertwined and interconnected with the interest rates of financing for everything being different than they were previously, and tying that into not only with the automotive but also with building, and I'm thinking about flatbedding and stuff like that, with new house production and things of that nature as well. The housing market kind of seems to be in a little bit of a not sure if they're in a bubble or what's getting ready to happen there. So all of this, I'm trying to see if we can connect all these dots back to trucking and how this is going to affect everything.
Sure. Well, interest rates are interesting because we've seen a pretty straight, just sticking with automotive for a second, and then I'll move on and talk about housing and flatbed. But, we've seen sales come back up, as strong as they have, despite the fact that financing costs have come up. So
really,
it shows that there's a real pent-up demand. And I then moved to the housing market. And what we see in the housing market is very interesting because, we have mortgage rates now that have been above 7% since, I believe, June. They're approaching 8% now, which, when I was buying my first house, 8% seemed fine.
That's great. Yeah.
More than accurate back in the mid 90s. But now obviously things have changed greatly. It's the highest interest rates we've had in 23 years. But when we look at the housing market, what's sort of fascinating is that, sales of existing homes have just continued to go down and down and down. And they're the lowest now they've been in 13 years. Sales of new homes, newly constructed homes that haven't been lived in, are down, sure, from, a year and a half ago, but they've been rising pretty much for the last mostly year, despite the fact that interest rates have been going up, mortgage rates have been going up. And my belief is that it's kind of similar to cars in that, a lot of people are buying cars even though they're more expensive because they feel they need a car. They've gone a long time that we exhausted the supply of used trucks or used cars. Pretty quickly back in 2020, 2021, and, or at least the desirable ones. And a lot of people just need a car. And I think the same as with a house. A lot of people are outgrowing their houses or they're, they have other reasons and they're willing to take a plunge. But the problem for existing homes is that if you already have a house, and let's say you bought a home a few years ago, you have a mortgage of 3-4%.
Do you want to give that up?
Yeah, do you want to give up a 3 to 4% mortgage
Yeah.
to get an 8% mortgage? No, you don't. You'd like a new house, but you don't want to give up that mortgage. And so I think a lot of what's driving it is that there's a supply issue. We just simply have a tight supply of existing homes because people who have them don't want to, they want to buy a new house, but they don't want to buy an expensive new house with a high mortgage rate. And so those
Let me
houses.
ask you, gentlemen, something. In the United States, they used to allow this in Canada. They've outlawed it. Mortgages are not transferable, like from one property to another. So I can't take my existing mortgage if I have one and go and buy a house down the road or in the next city or whatever.
No. And I don't
Depends on your contract, I think.
Yeah, I don't even know how that would work in
Transfer of collateral.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on your contract, I think, Chuck. But a lot of banks will not. A lot of banks are kind of leery about it and scared to do it. That's something that's really big if you have, which I don't know, a lot of people do anymore. If you have like some typical owner financing or something of that nature,
Yeah.
Private mortgage.
That's a little bit more easier to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly theoretically take out a home equity loan and use that loan to go buy another property.
Right.
And I suspect people have done that. I mean, some of the valuations have gotten so out of whack over the last few years. Existing homes, the median existing home is something like 45%, I believe, more than it was in February 2020. A new home is about 25%, and that 45%, that's just off the top of my head. It might be a little lower, but it was even higher than that just a few months ago, back late last year. It was more than a 50% increase in the median price of a home, which means that if you had taken out a home equity loan, you could theoretically take out a loan on the value of your current house and then go buy another house.
Yeah, you just wouldn't be able to sell that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you get in the United States on a home equity loan rather than a mortgage. Can you lock into a rate?
Yeah, you can lock into it. It doesn't have to be an adjustable rate mortgage. That's probably why not too many people are taking out home equity loans right now, because they're not very attractive. However, if you go back a year, well, a little more than a year, it would have been very attractive to get a home equity loan. You could have been,
Yes.
you would have done better to do that than to go. I mean, you could theoretically, it would have been smarter to, finance a purchase of a car using a home equity loan, because you could get, a 3% rate
Right.
as opposed to say a 4 or 5% rate on a car loan.
Right.
Now, would that necessarily be a great idea long term? Kind of depends on whether we're going to have a downturn in the market when you are ready to sell your house.
Yeah.
Because obviously, the more equity you have siphoned off, the more difficult it's going to be to sell your house and get what you owe on it back.
Right. We've got an interesting phenomena going on right now as I'm talking in Ontario. Ontario is really, really big on vacation homes. We call them cottages.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a cottage, which most of them are like 60 to 150 miles north of Toronto, let's say, or the big metropolitan cities. And banks are very leery about giving mortgages on cottages. So what people do is they have great equity in their house. They may own it outright. They take a mortgage on their house and they buy a cottage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And cottages, ever since the pandemic, have just been increasing in value better than anything, because so many people got to work at home.
Sure.
And so they bought cottages. Why shouldn't I work looking at a beautiful lake or a forest or a river or whatever? And what's happened now is these cottages have plummeted in value as interest rates have gone up.
Yeah.
And these people are stuck with a cottage. Now, people are spending as much as, now these are extreme cases, but I've heard of some $10 million cottages. Okay.
That's quite a cottage.
That are
Right.
they couldn't get $5 million for them in this market.
Poor guys.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Chuck. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, so it's an interesting phenomenon. Most people aren't underwater that badly. Most people are underwater for several hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is a lot of money when you're paying, 9% interest or whatever they're charging them.
So I'm
Yeah.
curious, Avery. Wanted to ask you real quickly as well. We've talked about electric vehicles and stuff like and things of that nature. What are you thinking of? Do you guys track or have any information or data points as far as how big of a push is the electrification in trucking going to be, or is that coming down the pike?
Well, I mean, certainly from a regulatory standpoint, it is already. I mean, in the state of California, if you are going to be operating in California, you have to let them know by the end of this year what your plan is going to be for zero emissions vehicles. So you're supposed to either commit that you're not going to add any diesel trucks to the fleet that you're using to serve California. In other words, let's say you use 10 trucks to serve California. If you add another truck to that, it's going to be an electric vehicle. Or you have to commit, and this is how most carriers will do it. You'll have to commit to achieving certain percentages of your fleet, of your entire fleet being electric by certain points in time. So that's the California law. It is the California Trucking Association just challenged part of that law just last week. And because there's also a sales element too, where beginning next year, a truck manufacturer must sell 5% of its diesel trucks in California. Well, 5% of the trucks that it sells in Class 8 trucks it sells in California must be zero emission. So in other words, so what that means is, in practice, because we're not anywhere near having any significant percentage of electric, heavy duty trucks, what it means is that a lot of the truck manufacturers are simply not going to be able to sell very many trucks in California next year. They're going to have to sell in Arizona and Nevada and in other places, not Oregon supposedly, because Oregon is me tooing that law, but other surrounding states. So a lot of trucking companies are going to have to go out of state to get their trucks. Now, the state is going to allow that. There was a compromise reached between the truck manufacturers and state of California back in July, and one of the provisions of it was they're not going to go after trucking companies that buy their trucks out of state. I don't know if there's limits to that, but it's going to be real tough on truck dealers.
Man, this is
punitive.
crazy.
A lot of them are multi-state anyway, so they may be okay, but it's going to really upend the compensation, obviously, because if you're a truck salesperson in California, you are going to be in real trouble unless your dealer has some way for you to be offset by that. Now, the dealer also is going to make money on aftermarket and repair, which obviously in a lot of cases is a higher margin, lasts longer. So, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but that's just in California. We have a federal regulation that has been proposed that would also require a certain number of electric vehicles by certain dates. The problem with all of those, though, is that this is the first time really in history, other than arguably when we moved from low sulfur diesel to ultra low sulfur diesel, but it clearly was not nearly this big, where infrastructure is critical to this. So EPA has authority to demand changes in the technology that is placed in an engine, right? That is within the authority of the Environmental Protection Agency. They do not have authority to mandate that states build X number of charging stations, or that state power grids be equipped to charge these trucks.
Right.
So the reality is that
that's the fly in the ointment.
It is a huge fly in the ointment, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel on that. We had a speaker. We have an annual conference in Indianapolis every September. We had a speaker from Daimler who calculated that in order to meet the EPA requirements, in other words, all the charging infrastructure you would need in order to charge these trucks, we would have to be installing something on the order of 90 charging stations per day.
Whoa!
We're not installing any. I mean, we have a smattering of charging stations that have been installed in order to test these trucks, but we're not there. And talk about the supply chain issues we had with semiconductors. Just think about the ramp up for this and what's going to be required. That's another reason, Chuck, when you asked about electrification, I just think that that we're going to be taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah,
Has anyone actually been successful on delivering an electric truck that's been in operation?
Yes, there are a few that are being operated. I don't know that there are any long haul being operated,
right.
other than
regional,
companies. Regional, and there's definitely local, and there's definitely medium duty that are being operated. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're returning to the same terminal every day, it can work.
But Avery, you know what? We've looked at it, Rico and I, and part of the issue is with the diesel truck. The truck comes back to the terminal, and although you're putting diesel fuel in, and it's as precious as gold these days, but you can send that truck out again for a second shift.
Sure, immediately without any downtime.
Right. Now all of a sudden you've got to put it on a trickle charge or slow charge in order to charge it, which means you don't get that second shift out of the truck, and then you also have the cost to purchase these things that are a lot more than a diesel tractor.
Absolutely, and a lot more, and it will be, decades, or certainly more than a decade, before there will be enough volume to amortize that cost and bring it down to anything comparable to what would be acceptable, with a diesel truck. I mean, in a long haul application, really, in my mind, the only way it works is if you can have the charging infrastructure, widely available at truck stops, right? Because the driver's down. If you can charge a truck in 10 hours, then it could work, as long as, of course, you get a 500, 600 mile, charge out of it, which is another issue. And now a lot of
that was going to be another thing, because one of the biggest issues that we have in the industry right now is truck parking.
Sure.
So now if you compile that, say if everybody, let's just say hypothetically, everybody switches over and have electric trucks tomorrow, and everything's in place, but how are you going to be able to park all those trucks to get them charged back up? I mean, you're going to have trucks all over the highway out of charge.
That's why this is going to. That's just one of the many reasons. Let's just say, hypothetically, we have the infrastructure issue resolved. Right. You still have a couple of issues there. One, obviously, is that people are buying a lot of diesel trucks right now. They can't afford to just replace them immediately. So there is, and the government recognizes, the federal government recognizes that. There's 2 regulations. One is a final regulation that takes effect in 2027. The other is the proposed regulation on electric vehicles. But the final regulation on diesel engines calls for a longer a lifespan for those engines that are meeting the new NOx requirement and particulate matter requirement. And the reason is that in the Biden administration's mind, this may very well be the last diesel engine regulation, because their idea is that these trucks will run until sometime in the 2040s, at which point they'll be replaced by electric vehicles. It's not that the administration expects everybody to go out and buy electric vehicles immediately, but they do expect there to be a very steady replacement of diesel trucks starting, at least in Class 8, starting probably around 2030, going, for 12 to 15 years. I'm skeptical that can happen.
Definitely interesting times, gentlemen.
Yeah, the infrastructure's got to be there. It doesn't, nothing works. They've got to allow the extra weight, which I've heard rumbles about.
They will almost certainly allow the extra weight, just like they do for natural gas in the U.S. So the weight penalty is probably the least of the worries, frankly. Now it does make things less efficient. You can basically say, okay, we're going to let you be overweight, but the reality is that because of the nature of freight, there are going to be a lot of operations that still are not going to be able to have the same kind of payload that they currently have, and we're going to still have to have more trucks probably for the same footprint, especially if we can't get 550 miles or 600 miles per charge, which seems like a lot to me. Getting 600 mile, let's say 500 miles of charge on an 84,000 pound vehicle, because you're now adding 4,000 pounds roughly for the battery. Seems like a tall order, even on the East Coast. Certainly, when you get into the Rocky Mountains.
It's got to go. That truck's got to go uphill, and it's got it now weighs. It's grossing out 84,000 pounds, and there's no diesel engine propelling it.
Right. I mean, by all accounts, electric vehicles are apparently very fun. I've never driven one myself, but apparently they've got a lot of good acceleration and a lot of good torque. But it does, just like with a diesel engine, where you get lower fuel economy when you have heavier loads, you're going to have lower production out of an electric vehicle as well. So I don't know that that's all that different from diesel, but it is going to be one of the factors that comes into play. Weather is probably going to be a factor as well. I mean, is an electric truck, I mean, you already have issues obviously with gelling, especially when you're talking about, some of the states have biodiesel requirements. But, will an electric truck run as well in North Dakota as it does in Texas? Things like that. So
this is Canada where I live, and it gets cold here, and it beats the heck out of your battery.
Right.
And then you need a heater on and a defroster and everything else.
Right.
And not to necessarily wrap up on a bad note, I'm looking at the time, but one thing that I definitely think that we definitely wanted to kind of touch bases on before we wrapped up and got out of here. So we thinking everybody here thinks that some people need to go out of business. Just to put it very bluntly,
let me put it a different way. We need fewer trucks on the road. Do people need to go out of business? Not necessarily, but at a minimum, medium, large carriers definitely need to stop filling all of their trucks just because they can. Now, should probably a lot of carriers? Yes, probably. I mean, I think the reality is that we've always had people who know what they're doing, people who don't know what they're doing. People who don't know what they're doing are screwing it up for everybody else.
Exactly.
And the best case scenario is that not only do you lose numbers, but you lose numbers from the people. Now, because of Darwin, the Darwin principle,
only the strong survive.
That's usually who you lose anyway, right? I mean, the people who don't know what they're doing are the ones that end up, going by the wayside. But I think the reality is what we've seen is what I talked about earlier, which is that, the entrepreneurial group understandably doesn't want to give up, easily. I get that. I totally get that. And I understand wanting to stay around as long as you can. And if you can, I guess more power to you. It's just, I think that there should be an understanding that this market is not like, what we saw in.
Not like
it's not, I mean,
No, they got it
off the charts. We had stimulus, we had, labor disruptions. We're never going to see a spot market like that again, absent something very similar. And I hope we never see it. But it's not even like, what happened in 2017, where things were pretty, weak for a while, and then we had a sudden run up. But the dynamics were very different. Than we were building into a growing economy. Whereas in this case, the U.S. economy has been strong. The
Yeah.
question is, will it continue to be strong? So we knew, we need to lose capacity. I think we haven't for a lot of reasons. I think one of them, frankly, is not a bad reason, is the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. I think that the driver who will continue to pass your drug test and who is not using drugs is more precious today
Oh yeah.
than he or she was 4 years ago, because 4 years ago we had no central database of those people. And I just read today we are now 214,000, I think, drivers have tested positive, and 149,000 of those drivers since January 2020 are still missing, from the road. So, if I'm a trucking company owner, I'm looking at it economically, and then I'm looking at it, where things are today, and then I'm also thinking, though, how am I going to build my, carrier the next time there's an upturn? And so I understand why we haven't lost more capacity. But I think the realization is going to, in my opinion, is going to come, fairly soon, that we're not going to have the kind of, rebound until we lose a lot more capacity than we've lost.
I totally agree. I've got another prediction, Avery and Rico. I think that the drug testing is eventually going to change. They were talking about hair testing, and I think it's going to go the other way. I think as more states legalize marijuana, and we're not getting, and it's hard to get young people into the industry, and forget about the drug part of it. It's hard because this was not the job that, it's not the same job that I got when I was 21 years old.
Right.
There's a lot more moving parts. There's a lot more responsibility. There's a lot more accountability. And it's, we need to bring people into the industry. And of course, with every, and we've done it throughout Canada, we have, we've got marijuana. There's more, the little town near near where we live has a population of 5,000 people. There are 3 marijuana stores in that town.
Well, here's the other thing that with the information that Avery was talking about, and I can hear some people in our audience yelling at the top of their lungs. Why do we need to have a contraction? Why do people, we need less trucks on the road, but yet and still we always hear there's a driver shortage.
Well, that is a fair point. I would argue that there just simply is not a driver shortage right now. There may very well be trucking companies that actually, for some of the reasons Chuck was talking about, the hair testing, for example,
right?
And I admire those companies that have very higher standards, and that they may not, even in today's market, may not be able to fill all their trucks. I will say that one thing that was interesting, we had a big jump in the number of pre-employment queries of the clearinghouse back in August, right after the yellow shutdown. And I think it was the most we've ever had, and that happened during a very weak freight period.
Right.
But I don't think it was just LTL carriers going out, because obviously LTL lost 10% of its capacity and had to replace some of that. I think it was truckload carriers, and I think it was private fleets too. And if you're a Teamster driver for Yellow, I'm pretty sure that you're a decent driver.
You can get a job. I'm sure you can get a job anywhere.
I think there was a lot of interest in those drivers. There are definitely, even today, still carriers that can't get all the drivers that they consider to be qualified. Is there a driver shortage in a particular segment of the industry? Still, perhaps. There's just simply not a driver capacity shortage right now overall. There just isn't. Now, again, maybe a lot of them shouldn't be driving, but they are, and it is having an effect on the market. The other reason I say that, Rico, too, is that we just don't see a freight rebound. So if we want stronger rates and we want everything else, it almost has to come from capacity.
That was the other piece that I was going to mention.
Yeah, we just don't. Consumer spending is just not positioned to go up. One thing that just happened in October is that millions of Americans now have to start repaying their student loans, that they haven't had to pay for over 3 years.
Right.
Do they, do they cut down on consumption because of that? Some will. Human nature is, no, I'll just keep spending what I was spending and I'll just incur more debt, which is fine in the near term, but it will have a consequence.
Sooner or later, those chickens got to come home to roost.
So,
yeah.
So there's just no way around that. The consumer sector cannot continue at the pace that it's been going, unless we have a job market that stays as strong or stronger than it is now, which maybe could happen, but I'm skeptical. The other thing that could obviously happen is that industrial production goes up. A lot of that is tied to the consumer sector, so it's kind of hard to see that happening. And already, as we talked about earlier, automotive production was already very strong. It doesn't really have. It's unlikely for that to get stronger than it was. So as I look at the market, I don't see a lot of prospect. Oddly enough, even with the interest rates, I think the best chance for growth is actually in residential construction, and that's just simply because the demand for housing may be such that we'll see. And we have seen, residential construction and new home sales, as I talked about earlier, actually do better than sales of existing homes. But as long as mortgage rates continue to rise, unless people think they're going to go up to 12%, in which case, hey, now 8% is a bargain. I should buy now. But I don't think we're headed that far.
No, I don't. I agree with you. I don't think
Avery, I just want to say I appreciate you taking the time out. I want to be respectful of the time. I definitely appreciate the time that you took out to come on and join us. We can't let so much time pass between the next time that we get you back on. And while I had you, I also wanted to ask you about the are you guys still doing you and Hank, are you guys still doing the oh man, it slipped my mind, the reefer
I don't work for Hank anymore, so that was a past job.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what the status of that is. I know what you're referring to as the unified food.
Yes, yes.
I don't know
FSMA.
Yeah, FSMA.
Yeah, it was tied to FSMA. It was something that Hank and I were working on around the time that I actually joined FTR. So I'm not sure what the status is of that. You'll have to ask him next time you talk with him.
Definitely, but in the meantime, Avery, if people wanted to find you or get a hold of you, where could they do that?
Sure,
where they can follow you.
Best way, there's all sorts of information on us on our website at ftrintel.com.
ftrintel.com, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to make sure I try to put a link down in the description for that a little bit later. Chuck, let the good folks know how they can find you, and we'll get ready to wrap this puppy up.
Okay. If anybody needs me, they need some help with their business, if I can help them in any way, whether it's a brokerage or carrier, please reach out to me at chucksnow280@outlook.com. And with that, Rico, I'll let you back her in a hole for another week. And I do want to say I really, really enjoyed this, and I appreciate your time tonight, Avery. And we got to do it again a hell of a lot sooner than we did.
Absolutely.
This last hiatus.
Wealth of information, and is always a great stimulating conversation. So thank you. Thank you again, Avery, for taking the time out to join us. And you, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you guys. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you took a little time to come and check us out and hang out with us for a little while, and we are always eternally grateful for you doing so. So in the meantime, and in between time, if you would, please like, share, and subscribe to the video. I'm asking once again, it doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us out tremendously. Like, share, and subscribe to the video. Hit the bell icon that lets you know when we drop new content. So if you would do that for us, we would definitely be definitely appreciate it. Tell a friend to tell a friend about the podcast, and do us one big favor, ladies and gentlemen. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy. Keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and God willing, we'll talk at you same time, same place next week. God bless you and good night. Thanks again, Avery.
Thanks, Avery. Catch you on the flip-flop.